Welcome to this Introduction to the Classroom Value-Added Growth Scores module. The purpose of the Classroom Value-Added Growth Scores module is to provide secure and confidential exploration of student-level growth scores and visualizations that support your local efforts to increase student learning. This module is a companion to the School Value-Added Growth Scores module, and the visualizations and tables enable you to get a sense or an understanding of how students are growing in achievement compared to how we would expect them to grow in achievement based on how they've been achieving over the prior years. This supports exploration, and exploration is intended to help you to observe how students are growing relative to how they're achieving. Based on that, you might hypothesize why kids are growing or not growing and create a plan to increase learning, and then act on that plan and continue to use information like this in a local improvement cycle. This module, like the School Value-Added Growth Scores module, has business rules that are used for who is included and who is not. The module includes all students, both mobile and not mobile, so that teachers and leaders are able to explore and serve all students. In this module, the Classroom Value-Added Growth Scores are calculated by subject and subject by grade level. So those average scores, if they're based on a small number of students, may be less reliable. So it's really important that you use the information available in the visualizations and in the tables to understand whether or not you have a large enough group to really form a strong inference about growth or achievement of those students. The other thing to keep in mind with this particular module is in 2024, it's the first year we had a roster verification system. And the students who are included are the students that were confirmed as rostered to these specific classrooms. So if you have students that aren't showing up in this module, it's likely that it's due to the fact that they weren't verified or in the roster verification system, or somebody decided that they weren't with a teacher long enough to be linked to that particular classroom. So the roster verification system is going to begin playing a bigger role, and so it's important to pay attention to who you see in here and who you don't see in here, and whether or not you would have expected more students, and then during the next rostering season, make sure you get them included. As with all scores, there are intended uses for which those scores were designed, and then there are limitations. And when we don't pay attention to limitations and we make inferences despite those limitations, we can sometimes end up going down rabbit holes that were never intended and not very useful. So let's make good use of our time, and let's look at what are the intended uses of these growth scores that are presented to you in this module. First and foremost, the presentation of this information is done in a way to help you build your understanding of how your students are growing and how they're achieving, how those two pieces are related. It's also helpful to review these data for patterns of low or moderate or high growth, and if those patterns are associated with factors like a student's performance level or factors such as the subject or grade level that you're reviewing, because there can be differences among grade levels, there can be differences among classrooms, there can be differences within classrooms among subjects in terms of how students are growing. All of that information can really help you to know where you're being effective in increasing student learning and where you might need to maybe look at what factors are influencing your students' learning. Also, this information is very helpful and intended to be used as an additional data point to support any type of collaborative conversations that you have that help you to grow your students in their achievement. So PLCs, data teams, improvement groups. Anybody who is looking to try and improve how students are achieving are going to want to look at student growth. These data are not intended to support inferences related to specific content or skills that a student has mastered or achieved. Atlas is intended to do that. So when you go into the Atlas portal, you can get information about how well your students have mastered specific content and skills. These data are about how students are growing based on our expectations, which control for where our students have been. These reports are never intended to be the single source of data to classify students. These are not intended to be used for evaluating teachers as part of their formal evaluation process. These data are, in all cases, intended to be used along with additional data to determine students' needs and to help guide teachers, coaches, and leaders in improving student learning. Let's get into the module. You are going to go to LEA Insights and log in. Now, all of this is secure and confidential because it provides you down to the student level information. You'll need your state Active Directory credentials. If you are a teacher, you may need to ask your administrator to set you up with those credentials. If you were logged into the roster verification system, you are likely going to be able to use those same credentials to go in and view your classroom data. Once you are logged in, you're going to go to a very specific tab. Now, once you're logged in, you're going to go to the Academics tab, and you'll have a drop-down menu. And this module is Classroom Value-Added Growth. It's very similar to the School Value-Added Growth. The difference is that students are aggregated into classrooms based on the roster verification system. So this is going to link students to those classrooms based on the school LEA for those classrooms in the roster verification system. This is one important difference between the classroom value-added growth scores and the school value-added growth scores. The school value-added growth scores, students are linked to the school that they would be in for accountability purposes. And you can watch that module to get more information about that. Just a quick reminder that the business rules for these classroom value-added growth scores or estimates are similar to the rules for the school value-added growth. They are from 2024. They include mobile and non-mobile students, with a caveat that students are linked to classrooms using the roster verification system. So the data files that were taken out of the roster verification system were used to link student growth scores to these classrooms. If in the roster verification system you indicated a student was not to be included for value-added modeling, then that student's score will not be linked to your classroom. But don't worry, those student scores are likely still available in the school value-added growth module. So that's an important thing to know. For 2023 and prior years, we used a process of certified cycle data from cycles 2 and 6 to link students to classrooms. So it's important to know there's a slight difference between how students were linked in 2024 versus how they were linked in the years prior to that. Classrooms may be at more than one school if assigned to courses or students at more than one school. So for classrooms assigned to students in multiple schools, the mean scores at each school will only reflect the students included at that school and not across all the schools. So that's another important business rule to keep in mind. The landing page or home page for this report gives you important information that orients you to the report. It repeats in print some of the information that I've shared with you, and it's helpful that that's available. Always remember, if you can't remember what this is about, go back to the home page and you'll have that information. On the left-hand side, there's a menu, and we're going to explore that. The menu on the left-hand side allows you to choose the cohort of students that you want to review based on the year that they had growth scores. So the most recent year of growth scores is 2024, and you can select that, or you can select any of the prior years. We have students dating back to 2019. You're going to select the cohort year for the scores. You are going to see students who are linked from that same year, all the same year of data. You're going to select among the reports. The reports include a report where we crosswalk achievement and growth, and also a report where we look at prior performance level linked to current year growth. And when you go into this menu, you can select which one you want to look at. They are organized under questions. And if you are not familiar with Arkansas's value-added student growth scores or how classrooms and students are linked for these scores, you can access information under the resource tab that will give you a deeper explanation. We're going to start with question 1. Question 1 asks, are my students growing as much as they were expected to grow, and how does this relate to their achievement? When you first click on the question in the left menu, it looks like there's nothing there but these 3 filters. You have to select a subject, a grade level. Once you've done that, it'll be populated with teachers, and then you can select the teacher classroom that you're interested in viewing. Once you've done that, you're going to see these scatter plots. These scatter plots take just a little bit of orientation. On the y-axis or vertical axis, you have the scale for the Atlas assessment, because these are your 2024 achievement scores for your students. And on the x-axis is their growth score, and it's zero-centered. So there's going to be a 0 in the center. That means the student has met expected growth. Anything to the right of that or positive from that means they've exceeded, and the magnitude of the positive number, the bigger that is, the more they've exceeded their growth expectation. To the left of that 0, the student is losing ground relative to the expectation. Now, these are personalized student growth expectations because they're based on a student's history. These growth scores control for the things that teachers, schools, coaches can't control for. For example, the composition of your class. You might have students who come to you in various proportions of different achievement levels. And this controls for that because their growth expectation is based on where that student has been. It's not based on a particular standard. And that's important for growth. That's an important and fair way to understand how students are growing in their achievement. So now we have these 2 scatter plots. On the left is the grade level and the teacher that I selected. On the right is all the grade levels. What you see here is a scattering of squares. Each square represents a student, and the color coding behind it represent the performance levels. So red for performance level 1, yellow for performance level 2, green for performance level 3, which is the mastery or proficiency level, and blue for the advanced performance level or level 4. What you can see while you're looking at this is how the students are spread out. Their growth, are they centered around the 0? Does it matter whether or not they are low performing or high performing? Are all students growing as much or more than expected? Or are certain performance levels not doing as well as others? And that's part of what we are wanting you to think about when you look at these scatter plots. When you mouse over each of these squares, you'll see the student's name, their growth score, and their achievement score. So you'll have that information right in front of you. Look for patterns. Are there obvious patterns like all my low achievers are not growing or all my high achievers are not growing? That's what you're intended to do with these particular visuals, is to look for patterns, compare this classroom to the grade levels. How are these kids doing relative in growth relative to how others are doing in growth? You're also going to get summary tables that are going to be beneath these visuals. You're going to see the classroom summaries You're going to see the average growth score or the mean growth score. You're going to see the standard deviation, the minimum, and the maximum. Then you're also going to see it for your school. And what's interesting about that is it gives you a sense of how your students' growth compares to the growth of other students in that grade level and subject within your school or other classrooms per se. One of the things that you're going to notice is that there are going to be some classrooms that have a full set of students, maximum class size, as you would expect. And there are going to be some classrooms that consist of only 1, 2, or 3, or 5 students. That's because during roster verification, students could be verified to a primary teacher, a secondary teacher, or a contributing professional. And for some teachers, they have students linked to them under multiple rows. So they may show up more than once in the teacher menu for a subject and a grade level. In this case, when you take a look at this, you're going to notice that this looks like almost a pretty normal class size. It might be a little bit small. And in this case, there isn't much of a pattern if I'm looking for patterns. Students are at many different performance levels below in their growth and above in their growth. So I'm not getting too excited or too worried about any particular pattern with these two visuals that you see on the screen. Let's take a look at a few more. I want to show you this one because it points out something that I think is important. If you look at the classroom on the left, you're going to see that there isn't a relationship between how students are achieving and how they're growing. So students are just as likely to demonstrate growth from any performance level in this particular classroom. And that's not always the case. If you look at the bigger grade level on the right, you can tell from the triangles that there are some classrooms where some students grow more than others, and that's associated with a pattern of a performance level. It is important to note that these are the 2024 Atlas Achievement Scale scores with the 2024 growth. So you're looking at where did they achieve, what performance level were they in 2024, and how did they grow. So the prior example was was mathematics, and now we have English language arts. And in this case, the teacher actually had more students to the right of the 0, meaning they grew more than expected. And so you might ask yourself, is there a subject area where this particular teacher seems to be helping students grow, and what are those strategies that could be shared with other teachers in their collaborative discussions? So again, if you find patterns of good things, then the positive news to share would be the strategies that are working to help these students grow. So that's important. We don't just want to look for areas to improve. We want to also think about where are things going well, what strategies are leading to those results, and how might we replicate those strategies in more places. I wanted to show you this classroom on the left and the grade level on the right, because here is a classroom in a subject area where the students at the lower performance levels are growing less than the students at the higher performance levels. If you were to draw a line of best fit through that cloud of squares, it would tilt slightly to the right, meaning there is a relationship among the achievement levels and who is growing. And that's something that if that's going on, you want to explore that. Why are my students at these lower achievement levels not growing as much as expected? And where do we see that happening well, and what might I learn from classrooms where that is not the case? So again, data for exploration and understanding and collaborative discussions that lead to improving student learning. Let's look at our second question in our second report. Question number 2 asks, are students in each performance level growing as expected? Slightly different question because we are now looking at students who ended 2023 in a particular performance level and how well they grew in 2024. Again, this is a way for us to explore for any patterns that might be getting in the way of all students growing. Our growth model is such that all students can demonstrate expected growth or more than expected growth. It is not the case where your prior achievement predicts whether or not you're going to be at a certain performance level. Because we're controlling for prior achievement, every student can demonstrate growth. So if there are patterns that are linked to prior achievement, then those are things that you can address locally and change. So this is an important report. The horizontal axis here are the performance levels for 2023 for this subject. The vertical axis is growth. You'll see the blue line that goes across is the 0 line. The colored bars are related to the performance levels, and they represent the average the average growth score for the students who were in that performance level. So these are students that are rostered to your class in 2024 who came to you performance level 1 or performance level 2 or performance level 3 or performance level 4. And this helps you to understand, on average, how those students grew during the time they were with you. When we look at these bars, the height of the bar, either above or below the 0, indicates how far, on average, students are either losing ground or exceeding their expected growth. And here, too, we can dig deeper. So not every classroom is stacked the same way. You may get more of the lower achieving students from the prior year. You may get an equal mix, but rarely do we ever see students just randomly assigned to a classroom. That's why it's so important to have a growth metric, because it doesn't matter what they did before they came to you. It only matters what they do while they're with you. So if you grow them, that credit will go to you. In this particular visual, in addition to the colored bars, you see these little whiskers. These are not box and whisker plots. These are confidence intervals. So there's a line with 2 capped dashes at the end, and that represents a 95% confidence interval. These are important because the confidence interval tells you the range of scores within which a student's true score would fall. In this case, we're not dealing with a student score, we're dealing with an average score. So this tells you that 95% of the time, the average score will fall within that range. We use this information to help us not jump off a cliff about a difference between two groups that's not meaningful. It helps us to prioritize where the differences are important and meaningful. So when the confidence bands or confidence intervals overlap, that means you don't have a meaningful difference between the two. So if you look at the red bar and its confidence band, and you look at the yellow bar and its confidence band, they overlap at the bottom, which means we don't have a meaningful difference between those two groups. The same is true of the yellow and green bar. They are not meaningfully different in their average growth score. What is meaningfully different, only slightly if my eyes are good, is the difference between the red and the green, because those bars are not overlapping or just barely. So keep that in mind. If they overlap, don't go crazy about the differences. you're looking for differences where they don't overlap, that's something meaningful that you want to dig into. Underneath this visual, you'll find a table that gives you the summary information, the number of students in each of those groups, the grade level, the mean score, the minimum, the maximum, and you'll see there the average scale score for that group plus the average gross score. When we average, we lose information about the fuller distribution. So it's always important to be able to see what is underneath that average. When you click on one of those up and down chart bars, you get the distribution. So you get this histogram that you see here on the right, you get the zero score, and then each of the bars in this histogram is actually the percentage of students who fell within that gross score range. In this case, our bar was slightly positive, a 0.1164 was the average. But you can see that we had some high flyer, high growing students. By the bar that's all the way to the right, you can see that we definitely had more students growing as much as, if not more than expected, than we had losing ground. But what this information does is it gives you all the students that made up the average, and it shows you positionally where they were relative to expected growth. And you can dig into the chart of students, you can dig deeper into this information. It is important to know that there are different patterns of growth within schools, across grade levels in classrooms, and across schools. So it's important to explore more than just what's one chart, because they can all look different, as you can see from this particular visual, how different it looks from the last one. This is a classroom that had students kind of spread out, and it's probably a series of classes when you look at the ends for a particular subject. And again, we would look to see, are these overlapping confidence bands, so the difference between the green and the blue, not meaningful. That doesn't mean we don't want to click on it and see how the students did beneath it. It's just that we don't want to go, oh my gosh, our students that were level 3 last year grew so much more than everybody else. It's not really a meaningful difference. Now, it's really close between yellow and green, and it's definitely meaningfully different between green and red. So you can click on each of these bars to learn more about the students and how they perform that are beneath these averages. We are closing in on the end here. We're now going to look at data and trend. Under data and trend, you have the student tables. And what this allows you to do is, if you're one of those people that wants to work with this in Excel, you can just export the entire student table. And that way you'll have the students, their scores, and all that information. And you can manipulate it in whatever way you want to manipulate it in Excel or your favorite analytical software. The report itself gives you a lot of functionality. It's filterable. Each of the columns is sortable. It provides all of the students linked to the teacher based on roster verification, and the growth and achievement scores of the student are provided. Now, something to keep in mind is it's only going to give you 1 year, because most of the time these students are only connected to that classroom for that 1 year. If you want to see students linked to multiple years of data, then you can go to the school value-added gross scores module, where you can get up to 3 years of student history, both growth and performance or achievement scores. I want to call out one confusing thing as we get close to the end of this. One is that if you're going to grade 3 and you're looking for science growth, you're not going to find it, because grade 3 is the first grade level for a science achievement score, and we can't do a science growth score until we have 2 achievement scores. So keep that in mind. If you do select science and select grade 3, you're not going to get any data. Finally, there is a guidance and FAQ available. It's in the resources inside the site underneath data and trend in the student table. And if you have additional questions, you can contact Kaylin Bumbaugh or Hope Worsham, and they will get back with you.